Dario Pereyra. He is from the Universidad de La Matanza in Buenos Aires. He's accompanied today by a student who, Ezequiel, ¿eres estudiante todavía? No. So he is Ezequiel Sagrado. He's going to help move the slides back and forward. Mr. Pereyra is the coordinator of the Carrera de Licenciatura en Economía of the undergraduate program in economics. He is also the coordinator of the Academic Program Model Organization of American States, and I have a few people who were just there, so you can wave and cheer because that's a really wonderful experience. If you haven't had a chance to participate yet, just talk to one of these students who will motivate you, I'm certain, to participate on the team next year. He is also adjunct professor in, this is very complicated. He's an adjunct professor in charge of the International Economics program at the Universidad de La Matanza. And I just want to mention a little bit. He's a prolific writer and publisher, and his two most recent books are El Comercio Internacional, International Commerce as a Strategy for Growth. He also has a book that was published in 2011, a book published in 2009 on the Organization of American States and the Inter-American Agenda, and a book published in 2008 on Cuestiones de Economía Mundial, concerns about world economy. So Dr. Pereyra is going to speak today about economic integration in Latin America. So,
well, first of all, thank you very much to all of you for coming. I would like to congratulate you because this university is amazing. It's very, very beautiful. We were making a walk with Dr. Basher, and it was amazing. So congratulations for university. It's very beautiful. I'd like to thank Dr. Leah Ramsell, Director of Latin American Studies Department, Dr. John McLucas, Chair of Foreign Languages, and Dr. Colleen Basher for inviting me to give this lecture and to have a conversation with you. I won't call it a lecture as the name. I prefer to call a formal or informal conversation with students, which is better, I think. Well, I teach international economics in my university. My field of specialization is regional economic integration in the Americas and worldwide, but I chose this topic today because I think that many things have happened with Latin American regional integration during the last 50 years, and especially after the 19th and what is happening now, which is, I think, it's something that I want to share with you. I wrote a paper about this presentation. I sent it to Dr. Basher, so if you then want to have a copy, I think you can send to them. I would like to talk first about the 4 stages of regional integration in the Americas. The first stage, we called it the old regionalism stage, which comes from year 1950 to 1980. Then the second stage is the black decade on Latin American integration from during the 80s, 1980, 1990. Then we have the third stage, which is the neoliberalism, regionalism, which was characterized by the Washington Consensus. And finally, the post-neoliberalism, regionalism in the Americas. I will briefly describe the first 2 stages, and then we will discuss the 3 and the 4th, which I mean is the most or the key part of the presentation. I have my presentation printed here, so I will help me with the topics. Okay, no problem. It's the overview. Okay, let's start with the old regionalism stage. The old regionalism stage began in 1948 when the United Nations Social and Economic Council passed a resolution to create the Latin American Economic Commission, which is the CEPAL, the name in Spanish. And the creation of the CEPAL, or the ECLAC in English, was product of negotiations on development. That was the word that initiated all these processes and continues now. Development. Why development? Well, after the here's the first stage of regionalism. Why development? Well, after the Second World War, Latin American economies faced, and I think still facing, a problem of commodity dependence. What does it mean? Many Latin American countries export commodities. In the case of Argentina, now 40% of its exports are commodities. And what's the problem with the commodities? Well, first, commodities don't have value added or enough value added. Then, and I think the major problem is the price of the commodities, because in international markets, commodity prices are volatile or vulnerable. So what does it mean? Sometimes in 5 years, maybe 10 years, commodity prices could rise, but then the bubble explodes. So what happened with the incomes of that exports? Countries faced some problems in the current account. So the idea of the CEPAL or the ECLAC was to change that pattern and to promote industrialization in Latin American and Caribbean countries. So a group of economists led by an Argentine economist, Raúl Prebisch, which was one of the first Secretary General of the CEPAL, promoted an idea of, or a pattern or a model of industrialization by substituting imports, which is the easy model which we have here. This work? Yes. The easy model had 4 characteristics. First, it was conceived as a promotion of domestic industries. What does it mean? National industries, domestic industries, needed to be developed in order to reduce the foreign restriction or vulnerability according to the commodity prices. This is the first point. The second point, import substitution. If we have to protect our industries, we need to stop imports. So the basis of the easy model was a protectionist principle on trade policies. Third, protection of national markets, protection from external competition, linked to the second part of import substitution. And finally, promotion of manufactured exports. This is the final goal of the easy model, promotion of manufactured export. Latin American industries needed to add value to their goods or their production. In this sphere, 3 or 4 regional trade agreements were created. But think about something. If the CEPAL or the ECLAC shared this idea of industrialization by substituting exports, and then at the same time promoted the creation of regional trade agreements, which main goals are to free trade and to liberalize the commerce of the goods and services commerce. So the main problem in the old regionalism was that from the beginning, these 4 RTAs were conceived in a wrong way. What does it mean? If I want to make a free trade agreement with him, we have to liberalize our trade flows, not to protect them. But if I use a program of industrialization by substituting imports, what happened with my partner? Do you understand the idea of this? So we have this easy model to substitute imports. Why we have to create these 4 trade blocks. Well, the CEPAL supported the creation of the Latin American Free Trade Association, which involves all South American countries plus Mexico, the Andean Pact, within Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Chile. Then Chile withdrew. The Central American Common Market, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Honduras, and the Caribbean Free Trade Association in the Caribbean countries. The common features of these 4 RTAs, or regional trade agreements, inward-looking protection schemes. This is basically the easy model. All of these RTAs were conceived under the ideas of the CEPAL of the substitution imports and the promotion of national industries. Import substitution policies weaken in intra-regional trade flows. If you see, then I think we have a table to illustrate this. If you see the intra-regional trade flows, we'll see that the major partners of Latin American countries, trade partners, are the European Union and the United States, not Latin American countries itself. So if we see this is share in world exports and share in regional exports. Think about in this. It is decreasing. This is the easy model. They are substituting imports, so the share in the world exports declined. Main countries, we have Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Uruguay. Something similar happened during the stage of the old regionalism. And what happened in share in regional exports? In 1946, Argentina exported 25.5% of their products to the region, and in 1975, just 8.2%. The same happened with, or something similar with Brazil, Mexico, and Venezuela. Venezuela is a little bit different. So this is another problem. We have import substitution and we have weakened trade flows among the American countries. Then we have industrial planning. The CEPAL promoted the idea of industrialization. Another one, rigidity in terms of goals accomplishment. What is this? For example, in the case of the Latin American Free Trade Association, they planned to establish a free trade area in 5 years, which is very, very difficult. If you have those trade flows in levels of 2-3%, and then you have inward-looking protection schemes and import substitution, it is practically impossible to have a free trade area in 5 years, because you have to dismantle all of these schemes and the industrial policy and the trade policy, etc. So the rigidity was another negative part. And finally, there were some infrastructure programs to be developed, and again, what I said before, the commodity dependence production matrix. Yes?
When were these regional trade agreements signed? Or like when were these starting to come back? Because you told us, or at least you sort of shown us on the previous slide, when import substitution is happening in Argentina.
Yes.
When are the regional trade agreements?
The trade agreements, the first one, the Latin American Free Trade Association, 1960.
Okay.
Andean Pact, 1969. Central American Common Market, 1960. Caribbean Free Trade Association, 1973.
Okay, so they are actually, I didn't know that, so they are actually trying to sign, they were trying to sign regional trade agreements during the rise of import substitution in the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
No. So the results are here on this chart. You can see that all these RTAs have not achieved their goals, because it has to be upside down. But no, 30.5% to 4.4%. That's the complete result. And then what happened? The second stage of regionalism. So the old stage of regionalism was characterized by these 5 or 6 points that we describe it, and the most important, the trade flows. But then what happened? At the end of the 70s, commodity prices in foreign markets were growing. What does it mean? That it means that all Latin American countries have incomes for their commodity exports. So they need to industrialize their economies, so they need capital flows from abroad. What happened? Latin American countries took loans from European banks, and these dollars came from the first oil crisis from 1971, I think, or 1973. I don't remember the year exactly. What happened in 1973? There was a political problem in the Yom Kippur War in Israel with Egypt, Jordania, and I think the other country was Syria. I don't remember exactly. That produced that the oil producers raised their prices to the developed countries. So these oil producers, the Arab countries, have many dollars, the petrodollars, they call the petrodollars, and they deposit their dollars in European banks. So European banks were full of dollars. So they gave to some low interest and with many facilities. Latin American countries took that funds because they need it, and they thought, okay, we have these soft loans, and the commodity prices are high. Okay, we can pay. So we need the money. We can take it. Perfect, no problem. What happened? In 1979, another oil crisis due to, again, a political crisis. It was when the U.S. embassy was taken in Iran. And what happened? Again, the oil prices rised, but in this case, there was a problem. At the end of the decade, commodity prices were declining, and the European countries and U.S. banks raised the interest. So the problem to Latin America was huge because they didn't have enough money to pay the debts because of the commodity prices were declining, and now they were facing new higher interests. So the economies faced a bottleneck, and the debt crisis arose. In 1982, Mexico defaulted its debt, then Ecuador, and it was some kind of domino effect with the rest of the countries. So during the 80s, the regionalism in the Americas, in Latin America, stopped and was paralyzed. Just in 1980, one new RTA was signed, which is the Latin American Integration Association, in order to change the patterns of regional integration. In 1990, the new regionalism arose in Latin American countries. This new regionalism was conceived under the Washington Consensus Principle. Okay, in general, and forgive me please what am I going to say, but it was not a consensus for Latin American countries, because it was a general idea which appeared at the World Bank and the US Treasury Department, and the idea was to deregulate economies, to open economies, to deregulate trade flows, financial structures, privatization, etc. So all of Latin American countries took those principles and they did exactly what the World Bank was promoting in some kind of agreement or consensus. And under these new principles, the new regionalism was born in Latin America, which was an open regionalism. As the old regionalism was a closed regionalism or regionalism signed by protectionism. This new regionalism is an open regionalism and included many of other things than just trade flows. These new agreements included trading services, investment, intellectual property rights protection, government procurement, and agriculture. In the old regionalism, the RTAs included just goods and the reduction of tariff goods. These new agreements, or the second generation agreements as we call, includes all these things. And there are three main RTAs that were created during the decade. Mercosur in South America, the North American Free Trade Association, and the project of the Free Trade Area of the Americas. And then the existing RTIs were reconverted. The Andean Pact became in the Andean Community. The Central American Common Market refreshed its objectives, and the CARIFTA was transformed in CARICOM, or Caribbean Community, which all of them incorporated all these topics to the negotiation process. First of all, I will briefly describe Mercosur. Mercosur is the South American Common Market, and it was created in 1991 by the signature of the Treaty of Asunción among Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Mercosur is the answer to the Black Decade in South America, the Black Economic Decade during the 80s. Why? Because at the middle of the 80s, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay started negotiations to promote their trade linkages and to raise new agreements. So Argentina signed a bilateral agreement of cooperation with Uruguay and another one with Brazil. Brazil did the same thing with Uruguay and Argentina, and Uruguay the same as well. So in 1991, they decided to create or to gather all these agreements into a new one, which was the Treaty of Asunción, which created Mercosur, and then they invited Paraguay to join the agreement. The agreement has the aim to create a free trade area among their partners and a customs union. Do you know what is the customs union? It's a trade bloc that share a common external tariff to third countries. What does it mean? Trade inside the bloc is free, but trade with a third country, the third country has to pay a common external tariff. I mean, if, for example, we have the customs unions of Mercosur and Chile want to export something to Argentina or Brazil or Uruguay or Paraguay, the external tariff is the same. That's a customs union. So in 1994, the free trade area and the customs union was established with some particular exemptions, which was the automobile and sugar industries. During the first half of the decade, the Mercosur did positive results. Trade increased among the members, but then there were some problems which were analyzed then. After the Brazilian and Argentine crisis in 1998, and 2001, the process stopped. In 1998, the government of Brazil devaluated the real, the currency of Brazil, and that provoked serious problems to the trade with Argentina, because Brazilian exports were cheaper, so there was some kind of invasion of Brazilian products in the Argentine market. Then when the Argentine crisis came in 2001, the process practically stopped, the integration processes, with two special problems. The first one, trade disputes. After the Brazilian crisis, and I say some years earlier 1992, there were some trade problems between Argentina and Brazil, but these problems were not solved by using the institutional mechanisms that the Treaty of Mercosur of Asunción or the Protocolo of Ouro Preto contained. What does it mean? If we have a problem, we have an institution to solve the problem, to settle the dispute, and to achieve an agreement. Well, that not happen in Mercosur. How they resolve their problems? The president of Argentina called the president of Brazil, and the president of Brazil called the president of Argentina, or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs travel between the capitals, or the Ministry of Economic travel between the capitals. This is a huge problem because they are solving an economic problem by using politics. So if we have institutions to do that, why we are using this political mechanism? Well, that was one of the problems that the process is stopped. And then the second one is asymmetries. What is it? You have in Mercosur, you have four, now five, but at the moment 4 economies. Brazil, which is the biggest, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, which are the smallest. The economic structure of Argentina and Brazil is quite different from that from Uruguay and Paraguay. Okay? Paraguayan and Uruguayan industries are very, very small in size compared with Argentine and especially with Brazil. So what happened? Mercosur represented 90% or 85% of the intra-regional trade, but this trade were just from Brazil and Argentina. The rest, the 10%, the remaining 10% corresponded to Uruguay and Paraguay. So the problem is that Mercosur for Argentina and for Brazil was a very good agreement because exports rose. But if we talk about on Uruguay and Paraguay, they don't think so in these terms. And finally, in 2012, Venezuela joined the group as a full member. It was, I would say, funny, but it is not the word why Venezuela joined the group in 2012, sorry, and why. The Treaty of Asunción contains an article in which it established that if a country wants to become a full member of Mercosur, the 4 parliaments of the signatory countries, the Parliament of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, have to ratify the accession of that country to a full member. Okay? Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay ratified the accession of Venezuela. The Paraguayan Congress not. What happened? In 2012, President Lugo from Paraguay was, I would say, fired. It's a strong word, but it was some kind of fast impeachment. And the Congress of Paraguay, ¿cómo digo? Destituyó. Destituyó. ¿Cómo? Impeach. The Congress of Paraguay impeached the president in 2 hours. So in 3 hours, Lugo was not president anymore. And the vice president became president. So for the governments of Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, it was some kind of coup d'etat. You know okay. And what did they do? Okay, Paraguay was suspended from the Mercosur integration process. So now Paraguay was suspended, come Venezuela. Because Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay approved the accession of Venezuela, Paraguay is suspended, so Venezuela could become a member. Funny story. Now we are all friends because Paraguay has a new president, and I particularly disagree with this, the accession of the form or the way of the accession of Venezuela to Mercosur. I agree that Venezuela is a member of Mercosur, of course, and I applaud it, but not the way, maybe. Perhaps, yes.
Why is now important Venezuela being part of this application?
I don't know. The Paraguayan Congress did not vote. They don't deny it, but they say, okay, let's wait. It's a matter of the composition of the parliament, the political forces. I think when Lugo was president, the majority of the parliament was on the right side of, so they really, maybe they don't like the Chavez government at that moment. So that was the problem. So now we are 5 full members in Mercosur. Yes?
I think there were some other issues as well, right? I mean, it was between 2007 and 2012 that Venezuela's vast reserves of petroleum became apparent, and so there was a much larger economic incentive for the rest of Mercosur to want to bring in Venezuela, and it proved to be enough of an incentive for the governments of Mercosur to overlook the democratic inadequacies, if you will, that were going on in Venezuela.
Well,
so there was some economics with the politics.
Sure. No. It's not about politics. There is something important, which is the energetic matrix in Mercosur. The participation of Venezuela in the process is very, very important because, especially to Argentina, the oil that Venezuela has and the joint programs of infrastructure that we are developing are very important. In fact, Bolivia wants to become a full member as well. Chile and Bolivia are associated members of Mercosur, and Bolivia wants to become a full member. I think that there is a project which is a project supported by the Inter-American Development Bank, which is the name in English is it's Inter-American. Intra-regional integration process for infrastructure or something like that. I don't remember the name exactly. And the participation of Venezuela and now the Bolivia will be very, very important. Maybe just to convert the Mercosur region in an energetic platform to export energy to other regions. If you can see here the interregional trade in Mercosur during the first years until 1998, the process was very, very, very good. Trade rised, and then after the crisis, we have these situations, and 2003, the process recovered. This is because the Brazilian economy recovered and the Argentine economy recovered as well. So, but this is the years of the main problems of Mercosur. But then the situation improved. The second major RTA that was created during this third stage of the Latin American and integration, Latin American, Caribbean, and American integration, I would say, it is the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Nafta, which was signed between US, Canada, and Mexico in 1994. The agreement was negotiated in 1992 and is the result of the Canadian-US Free Trade Agreement from the 80s. Then they invited Mexico to join the agreement. The main goal of the NAFTA is the creation of a free trade area, which is already created. It is a second-generation agreement because it includes trading services, investments, intellectual property rights, investment, government procurement, and many things which are beyond the traditional issues of a free trade agreement. It is important, the challenge. NAFTA is the first trade agreement which integrates two developed countries with one developing country. It's an interesting experience. Maybe some Mexicans would say another thing, but it was a very important experience because there were some political and economic concerns about the Nafta. In the United States, the Nafta, when it was negotiated, they thought that it was a very good treaty to develop the Mexican market. The Mexican export market was developing, but with the Nafta, U.S. will have a stable partner in the south in economic terms. For Mexico, it was very, very important as well because it guaranteed a free access to the U.S. market, which is very, very important. And for Canada, the accession to the Mexican country will allow it to access to the Central American market, especially in services and investments. This is another thing which is important, the low level of institutionalization, settlement dispute mechanism. Unlike the European Union, which is bureaucratic, very, very bureaucratic, the Nafta has just few institutions, especially in settlement disputes, which makes easy the work and the negotiations among the partners. This is important. What happened with Mexico? Because, as I said, the Nafta included two developed countries and one developing country. So the experience perhaps is to focus on the developing country. We have here agricultural production and trade 1990-2001. One of the sectors that was hit by the Nafta in Mexico was agriculture. The results in agricultural sector in Mexico were terrible in terms of trade. So many people from the rural areas have to emigrate to the cities and to the north because they lost their jobs in these areas. So if you see this line, we can see the value of agricultural production. And if you see this weight of trade on agricultural production, this point is Nafta, the beginning of Nafta. What happened here? The agricultural production of Mexico declined, then recovered, and the weight of trade on agricultural production increased. This weight of trade is not only from Mexico, it's from the three countries, and it is explained by the U.S. agricultural sector in the Nafta. So this losses of Mexican agricultural production represents these gains in the agricultural trade, especially for the United States. That's why the Nafta for Mexico in this sector was not positive. In other sectors, it was very positive, especially in the north of the country, when you can find many maquilas industries is the name in Spanish, which is a company which receives a part of a product, they transform it and then re-export it to the United States or Canada, whatever. In general, to the United States because the companies are American. And the last process, the free trade area of the Americas, which is, I think, the most discussed RTA in the Americas. The process began in 1991 with the Initiative for the Americas. It was an initiative of President George Bush the first. And the idea of President Bush was to create a free trade area from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, including all the countries of the hemisphere, with the exemption of Cuba, of course. The FTAA agreement was, as at the same of the Nafta, the new generation agreement, consistent with the principles of the WTO organization, the World Trade Organization. And again, the main challenges here: economic size of the economies, by the way, levels of economic development, and asymmetries. Let's take these 3 points. Economic sizes. The FTAA process was aimed to integrate 34 economies: United States, Ecuador, Bolivia, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis. Different sizes. Okay? This is a problem because the dynamism of the American economy or the Canadian economy is not from the Argentine economy, Brazilian economy. The size of the Jamaican market is not the size of the Colombian market or the size of the Mexican market. So the negotiation in this topic was very, very hard, because if we create a free trade area in all of the Americas, many national industries will disappear, because, as I said before, we have some industries which are not very competitive. For example, if you compare the Peruvian industry with the Brazilian industry, there are many, many differences. Brazilian industry is more competitive than the Peruvian. The same thing happens, but with United States and Argentina, Costa Rica, the rest of the countries. Which is linked to this is the levels of economic development. In the FTAA process, we had 34 countries, 2 developed countries and 32 developing countries. And inside these 32 developing countries, we have many less developed countries, especially the Caribbean islands, or Haiti, or Bolivia, or Ecuador, or Nicaragua. So we have the third problem, the asymmetries. Remember that something similar happened in Mercosur, but in a huge level here in the FTAA process. The main actors in the negotiation process were, of course, United States, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. In 1994, at the first summit of the Americas held in Miami, the idea was launched by President Clinton to create a free trade area in the hemisphere, and the negotiation process began at the second summit of the Americas in Santiago de Chile in 1998. In this map, we will see the main RTAs at the moment of the negotiation of the free trade area of the Americas. The Nafta in the north, the Central American Common Market, the CARICOM, Mercosur, the Andean Community, and we have 2 more, but after Nafta, UNASUR and CAFTA. This is Central America and the Dominican Republic with the United States. This figure is very important, because it will show us why the process failed at the end. Take a look on the Latin American imports and exports over GDP. This is an index of international trade which shows the opening of the economy in terms of trade. If we see, for example, Argentina, this is Argentina. What happened during the 90s? It remained steady, I think. What happened with Brazil? The same. sorry, Argentina was this one, not the other one. Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, the same. What happened with Mexico? What does it mean? The Nafta, the access to the US market. But in general, the rest of the countries, if you take the Latin American countries, trade was didn't rise at the same level of the Mexican trade. This is Mexico, as is the average of Latin American countries. So the process of the FTAA was launched here, and the negotiation process began here. If we compare 98 with 94, just Mexico received benefits of the free trade. This is the preparation process of the project of the free trade area of the Americas. The first summit of the Americas held in Miami in 1994, as I said, President Clinton launched the idea, and during 1995, 96, 97, there were 3 ministerial meetings, 98, sorry. There were 4 ministerial meetings where they prepared a draft agreement to be discussed at the second summit of the Americas in Santiago. In Santiago, negotiations were formally launched, and the process began to be negotiated. In the next map, we will see the negotiation process, again, the ministerial meetings, the summit of the Americas. This is the San Jose meeting, the Toronto meeting, Buenos Aires meeting, and I will stop here, and I will tell you why. At the third summit of the Americas held in Quebec, the process continued. It was in 2001, but the FTAA agreement had a clause or a principle which was named the single undertaking principle. What does it mean? It meant that all the sectors would be negotiated, and they have to make agreements at the same time. For example, the negotiation process in agriculture, in services, in government procurement, in investment. They have to negotiate in 2 years a specific agreement to free these sectors. So if they don't advance in one sector, the remaining sectors will be stopped as well. That was the single undertaking principle, which was a very hard principle because, as I said before, we have different size of economies, different levels of development and asymmetries. So it's very difficult. It's not the same to negotiate the tech industry in the United States that the tech industry in Argentina. Tech industry in the United States, it's well developed, not in Argentina. So we can make an agreement in 2 years at the same time with agricultural services. So the single undertaking principle was the first step to stop the process in 2003. Okay. At the no lo encuentro. Where is it? What in 2003? No, here. The ministerial meeting in Miami in 2004. The process practically stopped because the single undertaking principle was abandoned because there were not results at multilateral level. The negotiations and the World Trade Organizations declined as well because there was a problem with developing countries and developed countries, especially with agriculture and market access. Those problems were incorporated to the negotiation process in the FTAA, Free Trade Area of the Americas. The FTAA of the Americas faced, for me, 2 important challenges. This is first, average tariffs imposed by developed countries on different types of goods from developing countries. Take a look on this. This is tariffs that developed countries put to developing countries. This is manufacture. We don't export manufactured goods. What we do export is agricultural products. And take a look on the tariffs compared to this one. This is important to us, not this. This as well. But in general, Latin American countries, especially those less developed countries, were concerned about this. And in the other one, we have the second challenge, agricultural participation in the production, employment, and exports. Take a look on, we have industrialized countries, here, here, and here. Developing countries, and less developed countries. So, agriculture as a percentage of GDP, enormous. Population depending on agriculture, huge. Agriculture as a percentage of total exports, important. So, our interest, I mean Latin American interest, was especially agriculture. And what happened? What said at that time the United States? Okay, we have a problem at multilateral level. In the World Trade Organization, the agricultural negotiation is stopped. So if you can reach an agreement at the multilateral level, we cannot reach an agreement at regional level. And the problems arose. So the FTAA at the end, many sad situations. The terrorist attacks in the United States, it meant that the priorities in the foreign agenda changed for the United States. Now, economic, it was not important. Security became the first important issue. Trade negotiations in Doha, this is at the World Trade Organization stage, stagnate. The principle of single undertaking, what I said before, ministerial meeting, the single undertaking principle fell in the summit. And finally, in 2005, at the 4th Summit of the Americas held in Argentina, in Mar del Plata, the negotiation process was retired from the agenda, the regional agenda, especially because of the opposition of the Mercosur countries plus Venezuela and Bolivia, who strongly opposed the project, mainly because what the figures showed before, the agricultural situation and the tariffs to the agricultural products. So the FTAA project was withdrawn from the agenda. Finally, the post-neoliberal regionalism is characterized by two visions. The change in the US strategy. After the FTAA negotiations failure, the US changed its strategy to achieve a regional trade agreement. So United States signed the CAFTA-DR. This is a free trade agreement with Central America and the Dominican Republic. Then signed an agreement with Chile, Colombia, and lastly Panama. What happened in South America? South America changed the neoliberalism pattern of trade, which is liberalized trade, and some new schemes were born. ALBA, as an initiative of Venezuela and Cuba, UNASUR, which is a political structure between Mercosur and Andean Community, and the Pacific Alliance, which is quite different. The vision of integration is very different to the Mercosur and UNASUR. In the Pacific Alliance, you can find Chile, you can find Colombia, Peru, Mexico. And the main actors here, just the US and Brazil. US with its vision of free trade agreements like Nafta, like the FTA process, closer to the Pacific Alliance, and the Brazil vision, which is shared by Argentina as well, of the a different kind of economic cooperation, which will include the free trade, but in the future, not now. Now, it is necessary to have another schemes of another kinds of cooperation. Well, here we have briefly the Latin American visions. The Venezuelan vision, as I said, proposed the ALBA, which is not an economic scheme at first sight, and is a political scheme, and it is basically opposed radically to the FTAA process. Then we have the Chilean vision, which is the Pacific Alliance. It is something to the free trade, something similar to free trade, to opening economies, investments, etc. Brazil, which supports Mercosur and UNASUR initiatives, political view on the integration and regionalism, soft vision on economic integration and economic cooperation. Brazil does not support the idea of free trade. Brazil supports the idea of achieve the free trade by different stages during the time. Argentina shared and supports the Brazilian view on regionalism, but we have some problems with Brazil and Uruguay in terms of trade disputes. Finally, Paraguay and Uruguay, despite they are members of the Mercosur, they are trying to get closer to the US and the Chilean vision, because Mercosur didn't get the expected results. That was I explained before. And to conclude, what is it? This is called the spaghetti bowl, which is a spaghetti bowl. Here we have some meatballs. These are all the RTAs in the Americas, the regional trade agreements in the Americas. This scheme was designed by the Inter-American Development Bank, which is very useful. I use it when I teach in my classes. And it summarizes all the regional trade agreements in the Americas. You can see a lot of them, different kind of trade agreements. It's very difficult to see at first sight. You have to analyze it. But it shows practically everything what is happening in Latin America. So I have some final questions that I wonder. And if we have all these RTAs, which will be the best? What are we going to do? Do we have to follow the European Union process, or do we have to follow the processes in Southeast Asia without any institutions? So I say, what kind of convergence would be appropriate to harmonize these arrangements? It's very difficult because, as I said before, we have many asymmetries, many problems. Is it possible that Mercosur and Nafta models coexist or not? That's another question to think. And which one could bring a real welfare to the peoples? As I said when I started this class, the word that characterized the regional economic agreements in the old regionalism, and I think now, is development. What we need is an agreement which fosters development to our peoples, not just free trade. Free trade could be useful, of course, in some countries, but not in others. So, for example, to Argentina, free trade is not the best option now. Maybe in the future, but not now. We have to make some changes. We have to face some and resolve some problems. So, for me, the final question is: what kind of RTAs would be appropriate to achieve sustainable development according to the country's domestic economic situation? For me, the answer, we have an answer for this, and we have some successful examples in this globalized world. For example, the Southeast Asia economic process is one of the best to follow, because they integrated industries, not countries, industries. And I think that is what we have to do with Brazil, our major partner, to integrate our industries and to develop a regional industry. If we do that, I think we can achieve the whole process. Thank you very much.